Our Tibetan family is back. Oh, ngarutele number so ngarutele. Oh, number so. Yeah, so now I get to speak some Tibetan too as well with the Tibetan audience. Okay, so Lindy, you have anything to say? Any announcements or anything? Do you want?
No, I don't think I have any announcements. Only I just put a note in the chat that if anyone had any questions arising from last month, that they can either put them in the chat so that we can, or you can address them, now. If you wanted to do that beforehand, people can talk to you individually, whatever you think. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm happy to address what I can, but I can't promise that I can address. So, any questions? I think there is nothing, of course, nothing, a new doctrine, of course, this idea of one yana, single yana, as a new thing, but we haven't gone into anything doctrinally deep or philosophically deep. So,
yeah.
And this is, I think, also the case. You'll notice that same is the case with chapter 2 and 3. Anyway, just for the, I think, of course, we don't have any new audience. So just for the benefit, somebody who's going to listen to it later on, because this is a sutra, Lotus Sutra study group, Satthamma Pundurika Sutra, and if you're Tibetan, this is Todipema Karpo. A study group in the sense, of course, essentially most of the work is done background. So we are supposed to read the sutra first and then enjoy it. The literary work, particularly, of course, it's a very detailed description, a whole host of things that we won't have enough time to talk about. So what we discussed previous Tuesday, I think we talked about initially, of course, look at just about the nature of sutra. Why is this sutra important in the Buddhist world, particularly in the East Asia, and also in Tibetan, because this sutra is unlike many other sutras where Buddha was so rationalistic, well, like empiricist, basically emphasized so much on the experience of the Buddha's teaching. Because remember, ultimately, that, of course, comes down to this, that the only way we can understand Buddha's teaching is putting those teaching in practice, because that's the only way. And that is a defining characteristic of Buddhist empiricism, in the sense that you really need to go and experiment and observe. Only then you can expect to understand Buddha's teaching. Otherwise, if you think that you can philosophize and rationalize, unfortunately, you get to understand his teaching to a certain level, but the deeper understanding that has to arise from yourself, because you have to do the hard work. Namely, you need to experiment Buddha's claims. And put in the philosophical terms, these are certain bunch of claims Buddha uses to teach, and your job is actually to put and test those claims and see whether they make sense or not. And that's there's a strong line of Buddhist empiricism, in the sense that everything has to be practiced, put into practice, and only then you can appreciate. That's very important. Of course, to me, that's the essence of Buddhist teaching. Anything else, philosophically inspiring, that's great. But in the end, after all, what Buddha is interested, and you will see also in this sutra too, Buddha is interested in brings concrete transformation, change in person's life. If that change is not forthcoming, and if then it's going to come somehow in next life, I suppose we are deluding. We are not doing something right. Either we are just wasting our life, thinking that we are studying Buddha's teaching. If that change is not coming, then of course there is a certain fundamentally wrong in the way in which approach. So that change has to come, right? And therefore, and of course, Buddha makes that point very clearly, and that's what I call Buddhist empiricism. The idea that you have to put into practice whatever Buddha taught. And so therefore, otherwise, they will remain as a bunch of claims. And the inspiration you get is from the changes, the transformation. So if you are let's say if you used to be a very aggressive person, and then as a result of practicing, and you become actually karma and karma. Your anger seems to have dissipated at least a certain point. Then that's the boost to your actually conviction. Now, yes, actually work. What Buddha is saying is not only philosophical compelling, rationally compelling because it makes sense, a reasonable sense, but actually it's something that concrete brings concrete benefit in life. So that's the rational empiricist aspect. But also the other approach is mostly philosophical, rationalist aspect. And many people, of course, modern academics approach Buddha's teaching exactly that way. And especially one of the strengths in Mahayana Buddhism, and which, remember, this sutra is a part of it. In fact, one of the main driving force that put Mahayana on the platform is the very rigorous analytical process that is required, and that could be done philosophically. So therefore, many academics, modern academics, modern interpreters, they just are interested not into practicing Buddha's teaching, but essentially as a doctrine, as a philosophical tool, so that they can entertain, and that's perfectly fine as for a philosopher. But if you really want to make good use of the insight that Buddha developed, so that we can make our life more meaningful, then of course we need to take the next step. And the next step is putting those into practice. Okay. Now, this sutra is somehow unlike those because it's actually put devotionalism on the pedestal. Basically means that reason has certain value, but it is limited. Reason can rationalize certain things, but only to a certain limit. But at the same time, empiricism, to put into practice, you can put into practice what you understand. If you don't understand the concept, especially deep, hidden, very higher teachings of Buddha, you can't put them into practice. So then what do you do? Well, you would take Buddha as authority. And that's where the sutra comes. So therefore, in East Asian Buddhism, devotionalism, Tebe Jedang in Tibetan, put this way. This is actually one of the sutras that really inspires devotionalists. So therefore, it's a very popular among ordinary folks. They will read it, and remember the sutra says, even if just by reading it, you accumulate so much of merit. And literally, your future life is pretty in safe place. If you read this sutra a few times, of course, it might take a little bit. So therefore, this sutra, the emphasis of this sutra, the idea of devotionalism, where faith, devotion, and taking Buddha's authority seriously and trusting him, literally. In fact, you might have noticed the section that we're going to read. Buddha says this: "Just Shariputra, just trust me on this." I've read this so many times, and just trust me on this, and almost like saying the opposite, really, on what Buddha you usually would say. Remember, the other side of Buddha's teaching is, wise men and monks don't listen to my teachings just because out of respect for me. Be like goldsmith, cutting it, rubbing it, melting it. You experiment at my teachings, and only then you can accept. That's a very famous quotation found in Mahayana teaching, essentially asking us to really experiment, and then only then you accept. And then even now, of course, in Pali canon, we have very well-known sutra called Kalama Sutta. Kalama Sutta is even more dramatic. There's a group of people who comes to the Buddha, and those of you actually with me studied previously, of course, would know. I've said this many times. And where group of skeptics approached Buddha, and because these skeptics are lost, they couldn't understand what karma is. They couldn't understand what rebirth is. They were not really sure, because India is full of gurus. They came across a lot of gurus, and those gurus proclaimed their teaching to be the most supreme, and they would say, "Follow me, I'll show you the path." And then, of course, all the Buddha says, all the gurus say the same thing, and they say, "Well, that teaching has something wrong. That teaching has something wrong. My teaching is the most superior. Come and follow me." And of course, when you are confronted with many teachers who makes the similar claim, competing claim, but at the same time bashing the teachings of other system, then you will definitely be totally confused as to which teaching to take seriously. So then, of course, and in this kind of amidst sort of chaos and confusion, they approached Buddha and said, Buddha says, yes, Kalamas, you are perfectly right to be confused, bewildered, and lost. And he says, don't accept scriptures just because it is said in the scriptures. Don't accept the tradition just because it is your tradition. Don't accept even on the basis of rationality, reason, because somebody has, reason out, well established. Don't accept just because it is said by your teacher. This is so basically Buddha very clearly outlined that you have to be very, very critical, not only critical, but also careful in the way in which you approach teachings, whether it is scriptural teachings or teaching from your own guru or from the tradition. Because sometimes we take, this is because it is my tradition. It has a long, long history of the lineage system, so it must be authentic. No, Buddha says no, it does not necessarily be true. Your tradition, if needs to be experimented, seen, and justified. So then Buddha says, when you actually put certain things into practice, and if that practice brings you a benefit here now, not only benefit for you, but also for the others here now, then you could put that into practice. That's worth accepting. And Buddha says, if any teaching, any discourse and if that actually brings harm to yourself, others, here and in the future, Buddha says, just reject them. So in that sense, you can see Buddha's approach is a very multidimensional. And you might get slightly sometimes sort of confused as to why this sutra is stressed so much on devotionalism. Well, another reason that I can see of is there are actually a lot of people who just want to follow. Because if you trust Buddha wholeheartedly and say, basically listen to Buddha and take seriously his words, of course you get to somewhere. At least there is, you might not get too far. You might not get so far just by following, listening to Buddha's teaching and not practicing it. But if there are certain things that we can get correct. One is, if I take Buddha's teaching seriously, even I don't, meditate and don't put serious sort of meditation. Buddha said, don't avoid those things that, remember, don't do anything that is harmful, unwholesome. Do everything that is wholesome. Well, even if you just listen to Buddha's teaching and put that into practice, that would actually be enormous enormous change in the future. Because not doing anything unwholesome, which means you are not doing necessary karma that actually would pull you down into the realm of animals or hell beings, if there is. If there isn't, you don't have to worry. Buddha, this is one of the teachings in Kalama Sutta. Buddha says, yes, if you take care of the present now and do everything wholesome, and basically you get to lead a beautiful life, meaningful life, happy life. And you're also able to make others happy. And that in that way, you are also preventing yourself from misery, but also preventing other people from suffering the same misery. In this life, it becomes meaningful. And there is a future, Buddha says. Remember, the Kalamas are confused about the rebirth. And Buddha says, Buddha was conditional on this. Buddha says, if there is a future, Buddha didn't say there is a future rebirth. He didn't say that. If there is a future, because that you cannot rule out. If there is a future life, then Buddha says, that is taken care of because you have never done anything wrong. So why would you be scared about the future? And if you have done, all proper things, benefit other beings, and if there is future, of course, you can see that your future is sort of taken care of. So that sort of teaching you can see is basically as sort of a foundation. But even then, you can say if you take Buddha as a devotional on the devotional level, take Buddha as a authority and basically trust him, trust whatever he says. Because one thing that you know is Buddha is not going to deceive you because he is not interested in, he does not have those personal interests. Like ordinary beings do have a personal interest, but Buddha, because now this you might, or we might also need to sort of, in a certain sense, take this as devotionally, unless we are not practitioner. Because Buddha is free from defilements, does not have a selfish interest. So he does not actually has a personally to gain anything by giving us this advice. So, and then you could ask, why is Buddha giving this advice? For my benefit, not for him, not for his benefit. So if you take that on a devotion level, of course, that has enormous consequences, positive and consequences. So that's I just wanted to actually put there, just to set up why this text is devotional text, inspires so much of devotionalism, and because we live in this very ultra modern where everybody is so skepticism or cynicism, paranoia rules the world in a certain sense. We might think, what's the place for this text? And we might think, well, this text has no place. And it's quite, from one point, yeah, it's quite true. But on the other hand, you can see there are whole traditions, particularly in Southeast Asia, called Hentai Buddhism, basically whole founded on this particular sutra. So that's why it has a good, reputable tradition that actually that is built on this particular study of this particular text. Okay, so having said that, any questions before we start getting into the text itself? No questions? Okay. So then let me share you the screen. Okay, where is the screen? I meant to bring this up. Sure. Okay, this one? No? That one, yes. Are you able to see?
Yeah, that is good, Sonam.
Okay, great. Thank
you.
you.
Make it bigger, as we go.
I will do that. I will do the full screen. Okay.
That's good. Thank you.
Perfect. So, essentially, where we are last time, I think we are in now. Just to recap, remember this sutra set up. Well, I should say Buddha was in Walter Peak, and Buddha taught the sutra in Walter Peak. But before Buddha taught the sutra, he was meditating, and in his meditation, we basically demonstrated. Perform a miracle, which involves basically emitting the light from between his eyebrows, udna. And that literally brought into light the galaxies, different galaxies of Buddha. And that, of course, miracle was very unusual. And of course, all the Buddha's disciples got very confused, including Maitreya himself. And all the Shravakas and Pratik Buddhas, remember, all the Arhats, these are Buddha's, of course, disciples of mostly enlightened beings on a different level, but all of them got a little bit confused. So they asked the question to, Maitreya asked the question to Manjushri, and Manjushri, because he experienced, or at least remembered in one of his previous lives, Buddha Suchandra, Pradeepa actually did the same thing. He emitted this una, and then after doing that, he basically gave teaching on Lotus Sutra. And then Shariputra, Manjushri basically explained, looks like that's exactly what's going to happen. Buddha is going to give us a very special teaching on the Lotus Sutra. And Lotus Sutra is profound teaching because actually, remember, Lotus Sutra teaches on the notion of one yana, ekayana, the doctrine of a single yana. Generally, we talk about three yanas in the sense that three different types of vehicles, but this doctrine, sutra, emphasis on the one single yana. But also, generally, we consider Buddha as some sort of just like any ordinary being, ordinary human being who got elevated by his practice. So he becomes a transcendent in a certain sense, transcendent of suffering. But he used to be ordinary person. But in this sutra, basically Buddha's whole description was more or less like a transcendent, transcendent person. So then there's another. Translate into. Come on, sorry. Siri was just waking up. Trying to help me for somehow. I didn't, even though I didn't say anything to Siri. Anyway, so then another third theme of the sutra is, and the most important thing with the sutra is that it actually teaches Buddha's notion of skillfulness. And this is very important because that's why, remember last time when we talked about these 500 monks and lay followers of Buddha basically left as soon as Buddha agreed to give this teaching. So that's the first, in the first chapter, that's what happens. In the second chapter, then Buddha wakes up from his meditation, literally, I wouldn't say wake up, basically complete his meditation. And then Shariputra asks a question, and requested Buddha to give this teaching. And Buddha kind of initially refused, but on 3 requests, when Shariputra put this request 3 times, then Buddha agreed. Okay, so this is what's happening, and I think we are somewhere in the 200 something. So we can't be in 3. This is chapter 3. Sorry, wrong chapter. Okay. Yep, skill method. So, okay, so we have done all these bit reading. I think
we're on 249.
249? Yep.
Yeah,
okay.
last time, yeah.
Terrific. Thank you. Yes. So here there is. Basically, once Buddha decided, said, okay, yes, since you have requested 3 times, and this is, I think we talked about previously, even in ordinary times when Buddha and his disciples were asked to, or invited to, for a meal, he wouldn't say anything. And that silence usually is basically a silence of acceptance in Buddha's case. So, Shariputra, on the 3rd request, then of course, Buddha said yes, he is going to give the teaching. Okay, so now remember, and as soon as he said he is about to give the teaching, these 500 monks, and we also discussed about this drag. Tibetan word drag, I think when I looked at it, it's almost like shulma, literally like you got a kernel of a fruit, but there is a crust, right? I think that they translated as drag. So I suppose it's more or less like not the essential core, but more or less like the superficial sort of worthlessness. So anyway, when those disciples left, then of course this is what happens. Excellent Bhagavan, Shariputra replied, and listen to the Bhagavan. Shariputra said to the Bhagavan, a Tathagata rarely teaches this kind of dharma. Shariputra, just as a fig tree flowers, rarely appears. Now, I'm not sure if you have knowledge of fig tree, please let us know. Confirm if this is the case. Fig tree flower rarely appears. And Tathagata rarely teaches this doctrine. Is this true about fig tree? Anybody knows? That it really has a flower. I just wonder whether
as far as I know, figs flower fairly prolifically, so you have a different type of fig or something. I don't know, but most of them flower quite regularly.
So they got this wrong, totally wrong then.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure what's being translated as fig though, but
yeah, I think that's a possibility. Usually we don't have fig. I think there is what is it? Anybody remember? Kamala, you remember? Pamela? the example of the rarest plants, or no, they usually it's one of those plants that actually rarely flowers, and it's certainly not as a fig. I think that it's something else.
Yes, I recall there is one that's used in the sutras as jamba or something like that.
Medok Chambaka? No, I don't think so. Shimba Karza Kunjusum.
꿈에도
Kume Medor way.
꿈에도란 디스틱도요. 공부슈직이요.
I think there is I don't remember the name of that tree, unfortunately fruits. Yes, but basically it appears in other. But are you reading the Tibetan? Okay, so if I go with the Tibetan, then
아주 최비제를 잠바가
Chambaka Mare, it's certainly not Chambaka. What we are looking at here is there is a particular plant that basically rarely flowers. Chambaka itself is a flower, but he supposed fig tree, and if Axel's point is right, then if basically fig tree gives a prolific flowers, then of course certainly that analogy is wrong, or the translation. I don't know what actually exactly the term that they are using in Tibetan, so I can't go back. Anyway, something that we will look at it.
I suspect it's referring to a sort of mythical plant that only flowers once in a lifetime or something like that.
Yeah. I think I reckon that one. Yeah. 메도들 갈사 군주스면 큐르라 말에 짬바가 말에 큐르라 말에 갈사. It's one of those rare flowers that flowers, and it's the rarity. Remember, is also exemplified with the rarity of karsa. What did you say? La.
꿈에도는 미질러다 꿈에도는
Kumemedum. Not.
박삼신
Paksamshi mare.
Udumwaremeda.
That's it. Udumwara. Yeah. I don't know what's that in English, but Udumwara is. I think that's the plant. Usually, it's supposed to be very rare plant that actually gives flowers. So maybe that's what it is. Udumwara. Okay, but we have to go into the Tibetan and find it out. If you're anyone which are looking at the Tibetan and if you see, can you see whether it is Udumwara or not? Because then I'll have to change this the screen and go back to Tibetan. So it might take a little bit of time. But this fig tree, I don't know why they have translated this fig tree. Anyway, so that certainly it is a problem. Okay, so then here, remember the point I had made. Shariputra, believe me, I speak the truth, Buddha says. So you can see why it is considered as devotionalism. Basically, Buddha saying, who is not saying you can just experiment this. You can test my claim. He's saying, essentially, follow me, just believe me. Shariputra, believe me, I'm speaking the truth, I'm speaking correctly, and I'm not speaking otherwise. Shariputra, the Tathagata teachings that contains the inner meaning is difficult to understand. Now, this is sometimes, of course, Buddhist teaching has various, well, at least generally we talk about there are two different types of Buddhist teaching. One is provisional teaching, the other one is a definitive teaching. So definitive teaching requires a lot of exegesis, lots of explanation, because without that, you can't take a word on its face value. So if Buddha says, I mean, there are some sutras says, one of the advice that Buddha gave to King Ajatashatru. Remember, King Ajatashatru killed his own father and King Bimbisara. King Bimbisara was already Arahant. And then Ajatashatru, of course, at that point didn't know, because he was just essentially power hungry, and he just wanted to depose his king. And what he did was he killed his king and then annexed got the power. And then later on, he was so remorseful, and he went to Buddha and he was crying and asking what he can do. And then Buddha said, "It's okay, don't worry. After all, fathers and mothers are to be killed." That's what Buddha said. There's one sutra, especially in the sutra of Ajatashatru. And if you look at that, and we take that sutra seriously and put into practice, that would create enormous. Oh, Jacob, so it's a fig tree kind of. We put this. Somebody put me a. Are you Trent? Is that-
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I did a little, I was listening, but I did a little Google search. So it actually is a type
is fig.
of,
Type of fig tree.
yeah,
Oh, good. Okay, so then that means there are fig trees that do give flowers, but there are others that don't give flowers.
yeah, flowering every 3,000 years, supposedly.
Oh, okay. So that's good. Actually, that's good enough. Yeah. So maybe Uddamavara is a fig tree. Did your source says it's a fig tree? Because
Yes.
oh, okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for the confirmation. That's wonderful.
That sounds like a mythical fig tree, because there are no natural fig trees that would live for 3,000 years.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point too.
So it is a mythical one.
And they
Yep,
have a
yep.
fossilized one there.
Yeah.
Yes, fossilized one won't give you fruit. Probably in 3,000 years. Anyway, that's good actually. So basically, the point is rare, very rare. So then you could ask, why is it, if it is such a rare for the Buddha to give the teaching, why is he giving this teaching now, and why? That means, of course, all the situations are right. So of course that's why, and the whole sort of chaos, and the 500 monks. Remember, there are monks follow Buddha's teaching, who already, in certain sense, they are arahat. At least they believe they are arahat, and they live. So it's a big deal for them, because, but so far Buddha was saying that there was a three vehicle, and you can be pratyek Buddhas, individual Buddhas. You can be the disciple who seriously follow Buddha's teaching, and then you can be bodhisattvas. And Buddha has been teaching this, teaching these three vehicle all along. And then all of a sudden, now Buddha was about to say, no. You think you are an arahant? No, you are not. There is only one way, and that is a bodhisattva way. And of course, that's a teaching, essentially is a, but the sutra basically seems to be saying that Buddha usually takes these three vehicles very seriously and use it as a tool, eventually to lead all the disciples into one path, and that's called Buddhayana or Bodhisattvayana. And of course, it's a big deal in that sense. So maybe that is a very rare occasion for the Buddhists to give this teaching, and maybe that's why the example of a fig tree, even though that's actually a little bit sort of now a little bit ambiguous as to what type of fig tree we're talking about. So it looks like maybe it's kind of a mythical tree. Okay, but basically the Sanskrit word is Uddamavara, so that's the word. Okay. Now, so basically what we are reading here is the part of 2.50, the section where Buddha says the inner teachings are difficult. He says the Buddha's teaching contains, especially those that contains inner teachings, are difficult to understand, and which is actually the teaching that he's about to give. Why is that, Shariputra? I teach the Dharma by using various definitions, expressions, parables, using hundreds of thousands of different skillful methods. And as I said earlier, of course, as we came across last week, this also doctrine, sutra, is known for a skillful teaching on skillfulness. And these are, you use those skills usually to adjust to suit different disciples. What also this means that Buddha basically does not use one teaching to fit all. In other words, there is no such a thing. It's just Buddha's, one of the analogy that you use is just like you have maybe if people, let's say if you're a doctor, and if you have 10 people who came with the same head, some sort of illness in the head, a little bit of dizziness or some strong pain or something like that. And you'll notice that, of course, on a closer observation, even though all of them have the same illnesses, namely to, with respect to head, but maybe they are coming from different, caused by different types of diseases. So Buddha's essentially teaching is catered to different disciples, or the different needs and different characteristics. For this, what he needs is different ways of doing this, of course. So therefore, he cannot give one teaching, one particular statement, and then assuming that statement or that teaching is going to benefit all beings. So that's why, as I also mentioned, if you look at Buddha's teaching, if you think from Buddha's teaching from empirical standpoint, from the philosophical standpoint, from the practical standpoint, none of them would fit with the people who are actually devotionally inclined. Somebody who really are just have an enormous single-pointed devotion to Buddha's teaching, and they would basically go with that. So essentially, the point is, Buddha used different skills and used different methods of teaching. Shariputra, the Dharma cannot be analyzed. Now here, in fact, he says Dharma cannot be analyzed. It is beyond the scope of sophists, and it is what is known by Tathagatas. Now this, there is, of course, there's different ways to say why it cannot be analyzed. I think even that from the empirical standpoint, from meditative experience standpoint, unless you actually meditatively analyze, you cannot just use philosophical, rational analyze and expect to understand what Buddha's teaching is all about. So that's on the one level that you can say that. But on another level, of course, putting that whole analysis into much more phenomenological, experiential level, then of course, you could say that gradually one comes to a stage where you are able to experiment, analyze all Buddha's teachings, because everybody on this sutra can become enlightened, eventually enlightened. Even though you might not be analyzed all the teachings, at one level, but gradually, progressively, it is possible. So you can also sort of unpack what this statement means. Now, it is beyond the scope of sophists. That's I think it's important, because sometimes we have philosophers have this arrogance, thinking that yes, if you basically are able to come up with a rational, coherent argumentation of Buddha's teaching, and you think that sometimes we think that yes, we understand Buddha's teaching easily, and of course, we especially in this modern time when there is so much of competition with different philosophical systems. Everyone is comparing, the depth and sophisticated and the complexity of philosophical systems and its reasoning ability. And Buddhism, of course, is way up front, if you like. And especially Nalanda tradition. Nalanda tradition is way in front. And particularly, you could say the Tibetans have done enormous contribution in this case. You look at Dulda system, where the debating system is the most important technique of learning. And then sometimes we just do only Dulda and just do the dialectic and just do the debating system. Sometimes people get wrong impression, in fact, false impression that they actually understand Buddha's teaching just because they are able to debate and defeat their opponents. And that's why the sutra is saying, unfortunately not. And you can get this picture quite easily if you read Milarepa's song. Milarepa was debating with some famous geishas, and Milarepa has no interest because they are sometimes interested mostly in defeating the opponents through refutation. But Milarepa's interest mostly how to bring the transformation through practice. So their paths are totally sort of don't go different ways. But it is possible to bring these two paths, somewhere they can merge and somewhere they can complement. So, okay. So then the question is, why is that? Shariputra, Tathagata Arahat, perfectly enlightened Buddha, comes into the world in order to perform one deed. So this is another important point that I want to stress. So he said there is one deed, and this is interesting, one deed, one action, a great deed and a great action. So there's just one and the only one reason why Buddha was here. And this is how it is put. Shariputra, what is Tathagata's one deed and one action? His great deed and great action, for which Tathagata Arahat, perfectly enlightened Buddha, comes into the world. A Tathagata Arahat, perfectly enlightened, comes into the world for the sake of causing beings to acquire, acquire the vision of Tathagata's wisdom. So now here, that's the one explanation. Remember, basically, Sutta claims that there is only one purpose for the reason why Buddha is here. So which is unlike our purpose, because our purpose, our ordinary purpose, is just mostly egocentric. It is that you are interested in certain things, and therefore we do it. But Buddha's interest, or Buddha's only one function, is to make sure that Tathagata's vision is vision that other people's develop. In other words, he shared the vision of Tathagata's wisdom. Remember, Tathagata is Buddha. Basically, he experimented, understood the nature so well, thoroughly, and now he wants to actually make sure other people also get the maximum benefit. And how do you do that? That is making sure that others acquire that skill. And this is actually remember the promise Buddha makes to Mara as soon as Buddha got enlightened. And we remember in the full play, in his biography, this is what Buddha said. When Buddha was requested to pass away, when he got enlightened, then by Mara, and Buddha says, no, yes, my job is done. I'm burden free. This is going to be the last life that I will have. But I won't die until and unless all my four Sangha members are fully established in Dhamma. And remember, four Sangha members are full bhikshus and bhikshunis, and the Shramanera and Shramanerikas. And also, you could say the lay disciples. Basically, until and unless they are fully established in Dhamma, he says he's not going to pass away. So now here you can see exiled Buddha is basically saying the same thing. That is his job. He wants to make sure that this happens. He says, first reason is in order to acquire. So causing beings to acquire the vision of Tathagata. The second one is in order to reveal to beings the vision of Tathagatas. And third one is in order beings will enter the vision of Tathagatas. That's the final bit. So once Buddha revealed, and then of course show them the path, then beings need to enter into the path, because that's the only way. So which means, of course, now you can see also the practical component coming forth. So in other words, Buddha could reveal the path. Buddha can also give the teaching, but until and unless you ordinary beings or us practice and enter into it, there is nothing much Buddha can do. So in order that beings will enter the vision of the Tathagata's wisdoms, basically, then once we start, especially bhavana, experiential meditation, when you start meditating and experimenting with Buddha's teaching, gradually, and once you start, of course, to find the inner path, what we call the inner path. That's, you could say, we have entered Buddha's vision. It's, of course, start to enter, not necessarily complete the project. And he says, Tathagata Arahat, fully enlightened Buddha, comes in this world in order that beings will realize the vision of Tathagata's wisdom. So this is the four sort of reason. First one is to make sure that they acquire the vision. The second one is to reveal the vision, and the third one is to so that beings enter into the vision, and the fifth one is to realize. Now, in fact, this is Four Noble Truths, put in a different way. One is, remember, Four Noble Truths, the formula is that first you understand truth of suffering. And then the second way is to actually abandon the origin of suffering. And the third one is to realize it, and realize the path. Realize the transcendent, or to realize the Nibbana. And then the fourth one is actually to enter into them. So the model is essentially based on the same sort of vision, same program. Okay. That's why he says the beings will enter the path to the vision of Tathagata. Shariputra, Tathagata appears in this world for that one deed and that action. So you can see that particular action, Buddha has only one purpose in this world for the Buddha to appear, and that is to make sure that actually ordinary beings or Buddha's disciples basically realize the path on which Buddha went, so that they eventually become Buddha. And this is, I think, a reflection of all other Buddhist teaching, because let's say that if Buddha realized certain path and then he basically shows certain aspect and does not show other aspect, then they would say something, and Buddha denies that, because that would be like Buddha being close-fisted. In other words, Buddha is being not entirely honest, because there are a lot more things Buddha could teach, but he is not prepared to do the teaching. We say in Tibet, Bhikkhu, almost like being close-fisted, and Buddha very clearly denies here that he practiced that kind of thing. Okay, so let me go through this. I think that same thing. No. Shariputra, it is the truth that in a maybe this.
Sonam, excuse me. Do you mind
Yeah,
if
sure, go. Sure, please.
When you say, that you're saying tight-fisted, so the meaning of tight-fisted, can you just explain that again from that?
Tight-fisted, at least in this sense, Buddha, and the sutra says this, right? If Buddha did not teach ultimate jnana, ekayana, and if he just taught the 3 jnanas and to be the ultimate, then you could ask this question: Buddha realized the ultimate, namely Buddhayana, because Buddha was a bodhisattva, and then he eventually became Buddha. But if basically Buddha says, well, the disciples, you can just be Pratyek Buddhas or Shravakas, individual Buddhas, and you really don't need to be fully enlightened beings. Then Sutra says it's almost like Buddha being close-fisted, because Buddha is not prepared to show other beings the same path that he ultimately realized. Whereas if Buddha emphasized and gave the teaching on Ekayana, namely Buddhayana, being the ultimate jnana, ultimate vehicle to realize, that would show that Buddha is not close-fisted. Does that make sense? Yeah. And there's certainly, I think the sutra makes this reference. I think I don't know whether I don't remember whether he used the words close-fisted, but along almost the same line. But the point is certainly being made here in this case. Okay. Okay. So therefore here, on 251, 53, Shariputra also teach the dharmas to beings through a single jnana, which is the Buddhayana, ultimate omniscience, and there are no second and third jnanas. So that's a notion, the ultimate jnana being the Buddhayana. Sangye Tepa, the Tibetan, I think, quite closely translated, well translated, I think I would say, and that is connected with the idea that Buddha is not close-fisted, because otherwise he could be accused. In fact, actually, there are some academic responses, and even in Pali Sutta, I remember there was which Nikaya, don't remember exactly, but one of the Nikayas, where Buddha says, yes, I'm not close-fisted. I teach everything that I realize. But then there is on the other hand, there is a passage in Pali Sutta where he exemplifies, he brings a handful of leaves in his hand and says, Shariputra, look at the handful of leaves in my hand, and look the leaves in this grove. And he says, which one is more? And Shariputra says, of course, the leaves are leaves in the groves are much more. It's countless. And Buddha says, yes. He says, yes, what I know is just equivalent to the leaves on the ground in the groves in this garden. But what I teach you and others is like the amount of leaves that I have in my hand. Now that seems to be saying that, well, if that's the case, then that basically Buddha is close-fisted because he teaches only certain things to the disciples. But then Buddha justifies this. Basically, Buddha says he teaches to the beings only that is necessary, at least necessary in that certain context, so that you can gradually mature and progressively. Because let's say if Buddha has done all the things that he knows, that would be just like a massive total overflow of information, and you get totally paralyzed or maybe bewildered, and totally, students get totally lost. So there Buddha says, I give those teachings that are required for each disciple, whatever is required, so that they can gradually mature and become established in Dhamma. And then, of course, eventually he will start opening up, and mostly, in fact, they themselves will gradually open up and learn more and more things. Now, in this case, Sutta basically saying literally the opposite. Well, not necessarily the opposite, along the same line, but Buddha saying, yes, eventually Buddha needs to reveal whatever he knows to all the disciples, because otherwise he would be accused of being close-fisted. Okay, and he says, Shariputra, this is the true nature everywhere, in all worlds, in the 10 directions. Why is that, Shariputra? Tathagata? Okay. Okay, so that's, I think, essentially Buddha was saying that all Buddhas, basically with the same intention to benefit beings, they come, this is sometimes good also. They intention for the beings, for the sake of many beings, for the benefit of many beings, for the happiness of many beings. I'm reading 253, okay? For the benefit of beings, for the happiness of many beings, and with the compassion for the world, for the sake of a great number of beings, for the benefit of happiness, as for the benefit and happiness of devas and humans. They taught Dhamma by using a variety of teachings on accomplishment, on various teachings on causes and reasons, parables, skillful. And the point, again, being made repeatedly here is, yes, that's the job of Buddha. Basically, Buddha appeared in the world solely for the benefit of all beings, for the compassion, and for the to benefit, to establish beings on the path of Dhamma. Okay, so that being said, now let's move a bit further. I think. Now this bit, I think, is also interesting. So here, I'm sure, I think many of you have heard this expression, degeneration, age of degeneration. Now, and this sutra explicitly make this point. He says, Shariputra, okay, and sorry, 2.61. However, when Tathagatas, Arhats, perfect enlightened Buddhas appear during the degeneration of an aeon, when there is the degeneration of beings, degeneration through the kleshas, degeneration of view, degeneration of lifespan, then Shariputra, when there is that turmoil of the degeneration of era, many defilements in beings have craving and few roots of merits. Then Shariputra, Tathagata, Arhats, perfectly enlightened beings with skill in methods, each that teach that a single Buddhayana as a teaching of three yanas. Interesting, isn't it? On the one hand, remember this is supposed to be very, very high level teaching, very sophisticated teaching. But then the teaching is only taught when during the time of degeneration, when 5 degenerations present. So anyway, the point is this idea of degeneration. What that means is, if you compare the human era, our era with the era when Buddha flourished 2,500 years ago. Of course, according to the Buddhist tradition, there's a dramatic difference in the nature of beings. So during the time of Buddha, of course, beings do have kleshas, because otherwise, they will not take birth in the samsara. So they would have kleshas, or kleshas afflictive emotions, defilements, if you like. But then those defilements are very subtle defilements, so they can be easily eradicated. But when time goes on, further and further from Buddha's teaching, 2,500 years, the amount of defilements, or what do you call afflictive emotions, kleshas, tend to become more crude. So then, of course, a lot more work is required to be able to eradicate them. So that's therefore degeneration in that sense. Degeneration of beings, because the quality or nature of beings, disposition of beings constantly change. During the time of Buddha or earlier, fortunate time, people are much more gentle, generous, more nimble, more, not so sort of calculating. And now, of course, things change. I mean, people become smarter and smarter, more and more cunning. And that is not that's not a positive description, at least on this. This actually is a kind of negative description. That means there is a declining of human nature. And then degeneration of beings, degeneration through kleshas. How is this decline of human nature? It happens because of the nature of afflictive emotions, defilements that is within their mind, mental stream, that becomes more and more crude, more and more rough, calculating, egocentric. And we could say this, maybe I was a little naive. When I remember that, I don't know if there were good old days in Tibet when there was no money. And people do have very minimum things to eat, but they are so generous. So, whatever, if they come across some neighbors or maybe some visitors, they would basically give the best to them. And there is no expectation, anything from them. There was a time when everyone is sort of very, maybe naive, I don't know, but very innocent, not self-calculating. But then when the introduction of monetary system things came, I think there is a dramatic shift in people's mentality. So-called when people become more and more civilized, they, unfortunately, what's the word? Innocence seems to be lost, and people become much more calculating. Anyway, they even at least in my view, that's happened within 30, 40 years that I can see. There is a dramatic shift. As far as I can see, in some community, Tibetan community. I'm not sure if that's actually with other communities in the West. Degeneration through kleshas, degeneration of view, and then because the view is here. Remember the different types of view. View essentially is the view with the personal identity, egocentric view, considering that my view is the most important. My view, my approach, my perspective, and of course time now. So the generation of individualism, where every view supposedly trumps any other views. So if it is my view, well, I can actually take that as the most serious and the most authentic or the most reasonable view. And if taking that into account, then you can see that there is actually the certain views become so dominant, and the view of so-called capitalism, where nothing matters except money. There is no value whatsoever except the value of money, and that seems to be absolute degeneration of human, values. But even if you go into any system, because every system, basically any system of education or any, that's what matters in the end. Any system that does not make money it's not worth it. There's no value as such. So, and if, of course, that seems to mean that principles of honesty, transparency, they might matter to a certain extent. Or nowadays, in humanity, democracy, those principles, worthy principles, that's kind of gradually losing a grip, even in these Western, liberal democratic society, because after all, money trumps. And if you're able to make profit, your trade, so-called, is the most important. Anything else becomes less and less important. So the view, the idea that these the values are placed on anything that makes money seems to be the one view that actually trumps everything else. And that seems to be said, I think. So humanity and values that are based on transparency, compassion, empathy. Of course, these are still there, and many people are actually bringing those up. But then, by and large, that's all there is in the world. And every whole society seems to be gearing towards that, realizing that dream, which is what is happening. So it seems to be, remember, there is something called contentment and fewness of desires during the time of Gandhi, and there seems to be almost like they are no longer almost like valued anymore. They seems to be lost in the academia, and if you talk about those things, they almost take you kind of belong to some other civilization, not to this civilization. So if you look at this, then there is some serious thing going on. So degeneration of lifespan, that it could be interestingly the other way around, right? Well, during the time of Buddha or before that, fortune period, suppose people live supposed to be hundreds of years, very healthy life. But now, of course, people rarely do live 100 years. If they live 100 years, then of course, usually most of their later lives going to be pretty difficult life. And we know, of course, now in the West, because of the medication, because of the modernization of the West, improvement in the technology and so forth, basically rapidly increase their lifespan to a certain extent compared to medieval time. But then what is the quality of life? Not much. Actually, if you live with no memory, is it a life? Is it worth living? If you live with no support, family support, basically just totally isolated, and if you don't feel isolated, that's a different case. If you feel so, let's say if you isolate yourself and if you are totally contented, feel happy by yourself, and that's, of course, most of the meditators, yogis are like that. Live in the Himalayas, totally isolated, but they never feel isolated. They feel, in fact, they are much more sort of engaged, much more in touch with the life. They don't feel isolated because of the meditative strength. But then, if you in many old age housing programs, you see terrible sort of a lifestyle, unfortunately. And is it a good thing? Of course, on the one hand, it's a great, at least they are living, at least they are having a life. But on the other hand, if you look at the real quality of life, then is it to have a short, maybe 50 years of quality life, or not so good quality, but 100 years? What would you choose? Perhaps it's supposed up to us to choose which direction you want. So anyway, this notion of degeneration seems to be a pertinent topic, and it could actually raise. You might have other questions in that respect. Any questions? If I open this to floor? Okay. Everybody's happy with the degeneration? Being a degenerated being, of course, we might have people could, okay, yeah, well, that's we are. Why not? So
it's easily understandable, though, Sonam, isn't it?
Yep.
Quite easy to see the flow of how
it is going, how it is degeneration progressing. I don't know if that's a progress or. Okay.
I think it's a degeneration of the environment and the animals, and which is just blows my mind.
Terrific. That's a good point too. Actually.
And the plastics everywhere. Yep. There's even plastics in the most remote glaciers.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's to me.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Actually,
it just.
Sorry, go on.
Oh, I just melt.
Yeah. Yes, if you ask deep question, why is actually these industries that makes plastics there in the first place? knowing very well that they actually cause so much of damage to the nature, to the marine life, and now, of course, as essentially damaging or even at the risk of survival of human beings, but they keep still using those plastics. And as I said earlier, what matters most is the profit. If you can't make profit, nothing matters. And if this is the age that we live, then unfortunately, yes, I think they are not interested in anything addressing those issues, because after all, it comes at the risk of making profit, and they would not change.
It seems to be the system that's degenerate.
Yeah. Very true. But you can ask, the systems are built by individuals.
Yeah.
So in the end, it comes down to individual priorities, right? So these big corporations are run by big individuals, and perhaps millionaires, multimillionaires, billionaires, and they seem to still go on doing it, even though they know that they're ultra rich, they have everything. But they, and of course, some, that means, of course, that doesn't mean there are some individuals who actually do the right thing, and there are some individuals like that. At least that's a good thing. But generally, yes, I think the problem of capitalism, where maximum production and maximum consumption, because capitalism thrives on the idea that there is a maximum consumption. People need to consume maximally, and it is this economic principle that actually drive this planet to its extinction, because we're not thinking about the future generation. We're just thinking about what we can consume now, and we have to consume, to the extent that we are not basically, we don't care if there is nothing left next, or even in 10 years' time. We don't care about our future generations of our kids, because we are basically to consume maximally. And if you look at how the government does, so-called injecting in the economy, because people need to consume, and if you don't consume, capitalism doesn't thrive. And unfortunately, in that case, this planet has only certain sort of resources that could be replenishable, and at a certain time, that replenishable resources would even be dwindle, not enough for the billions of the people. Anyway, yes, I think there are environmental crisis, you could say, is one of the symptoms that is at our face, expressing itself, crying, Earth is crying for the action that we are performing. Unfortunately. So degeneration, after all. Okay, so then if you read briefly 2.62, Shariputra, those Shravakas, Arahats, Pratik Buddhas who do not listen to, do not engage in, do not comprehend the activity of Tathagata that causes the acquisition of Buddhayana, you should know that Shariputra are not Shravakas of Buddha, and you should know that they are not his Arahats or Pratik Buddhas. Now this is important, because you could ask at the point, remember those 500 so-called Buddhist disciples left as soon as Buddha agreed to teach these Ekayana doctrine, single yana doctrine or skillful doctrine. And now Buddha is saying, actually, those Pratik Buddhas, Shravakas, who claim that they are Arhats, who claim that they are Buddha's disciples, actually are not Buddha's disciples. Because if they are Buddha's disciples, they would understand Buddha's teaching, but they fail to do it. And this is the explanation why Buddha says they left, precisely because they actually failed to realize the goal that Buddha taught, or at least the teaching Buddha taught. Also, Shariputra, those bhikshus and bhikkhunis who vow to become arahats do not possess the aspiration to the enlightenment, to the highest complete enlightenment. That's the first reason is that they did not understand Buddha's teaching, so therefore they left. And the second reason Buddha supplies here is that they are not interested in becoming fully enlightened. They are not interested in becoming Buddha, in other words, because Ekayana is all about the path to become a Buddha, and they have no interest. They just are more individualistic, if you like, oriented. So they think that if you attained nirvana, and that they will be satisfactory. And Buddha is saying, no, they have no interest. So therefore, they have no interest to come back and serve the humanity or serve for the greater good. Okay, and then Shariputra asks, know them to be arrogant. Why is that? Shariputra asked this question. Shariputra, it is impossible that the bhikkhus, arahat, whose defilements have ceased, who hears this dharma in the presence of the Tathagata, will be unable to have faith in it unless it is after the Tathagata's nirvana. Now Buddha explains this further. Basically says, it is impossible, in fact, he says, impossible for the Buddha's disciples, if they free themselves from the defilements based on Buddha's teaching, and who hears Buddha's teaching correctly, will be unable to have faith in Buddha's teaching. What is Buddha about to say? It is impossible to have faith, impossible not to have faith. The point is, I think, put it differently, if there are true Pratyek Buddhas and Shravakas and Arahats, Buddha is saying that it is impossible for them not understand the teaching that Buddha is going to give. So that's why basically that explains why they left, because they are not actually interested, and they are not actually a true follower of Buddha, in fact. And he says, this could happen if Buddha passes away, because at least when Buddha's around, and they knowing, and if you're a true follower of Buddha and practice Buddha's teaching and realize all according to Buddha's teaching, you would have enormous trust. You would take Buddha's word seriously. You would not actually doubt what Buddha's going to say. But their whole mind is basically doubtful of what Buddha's going to teach, and therefore they left. So why is that, Shariputra? At the time after Tathagata Nirvana, these Arahant, these Shravakas will not preserve to teach this kind of sutra. And it's quite true, I think. If you compare this take this from the Mahayana context, you won't see this sutra anywhere. Perhaps because of Shravakas and Pratyek Buddhas are not interested in preserving. So which means they would not, in fact, listen to this kind of teaching. Shariputra, they will have no doubt concerning this dharma teaching from other Tathagatas, Arahats, perfectly enlightened beings. Shariputra, have faith in me, trust in me, and have confidence in me. Now, as I said earlier, basically Buddha was asking from Shariputra, just take my word seriously. I'm not lying. I have no reason to lie. Okay. So let me move on. Oh, okay. So I think we have, okay, after having this, I think we could move to this. There are, of course, you can read, and there are not, this basically a large discussion on the Buddha's biography, I think that we have read already in the other section. So we can come back to the third chapter where Buddha says, okay, now, basically Buddha explains with a parable in this how these Triyanas, or juxtaposing the Triyana teachings with a parable to as a way to explain how Buddha teach to his disciples the concept of Triyana, and he's going to use interesting, in fact, kind of quite illustrative parable, so for us to understand it. I think we'll do that after a tea break. Is that okay, Lindy?
That sounds great, Sonam.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a 5-minute tea break. We can all just go and get a cup of tea and come back.
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so with this, I think essentially this chapter opens with Shariputra. Of course, was very happy to hear this new teaching about Ekayana and 1 week doctrine and the teaching on skillfulness. But he also says here that this is one of those. Of course, he was overjoyed with this, but he says that he has never heard this. And if you read 3.2, it says, Bhagwan, it is because I have never heard this kind of dharma from Bhagwan. When I saw other bodhisattvas heard the names of Buddhas, those bodhisattvas will become in the future, and yet still had not heard this kind of Dhamma teaching from Bhagwan. I imagine that I was deprived of that kind of vision of Buddhagata's wisdom and was extremely grieved and extremely distressed. In a sense, Shariputra was sad because he was thinking that maybe deprived. Was it that because Buddha basically did not deliberately teach him? Sounds like that. But then Bhagwan, whenever I went to stay alone in the mountain, caves, forests, groves, river banks, or the fruit of trees, and many other places for my daytime rest, I thought everyone enters the nature of Dharma equally, but we are being liberated by Bhagwan through the Hinayana. So essentially, Shariputra thought, well, Buddha wasn't. Why did Buddha basically taught us Hinayana rather than Bodhisattvayana or Buddhayana? He was kind of, I suppose, a little bit disappointed with his master at this point. It looks like it. At that time, I thought the fault is, but then again, he admits that actually this fault is ours. The fault is not the Bhagwan. Why is that? If we had stayed when the Bhagwan was teaching the excellent Dharma, commending with the highest complete enlightenment, then Bhagwan, we also would have been liberated in that Dharma also. So as soon as he was expressing his disappointment and frustration because of being deprived from Buddhayana rather than Hinayana, he thought he was being taught in Hinayana, and then realized there was certain occasion perhaps Buddha was teaching Mahayana, giving Mahayana discourses, and then somehow Shariputra and others who are Arahants basically failed to heed to Buddha's teaching. That means, of course, it's not a problem. It is not the problem or the mistake of Buddha, but the mistake of themselves, because they did not pay attention to it. So that seems what is being implied here. Also, Bhagavan, when the Bodhisattvas were not present, we did not understand the Bhagwan's teaching and had an implied meaning. So Shariputra essentially, of course, in this case, in this sutra, you can see that Shariputra was acknowledging the presence of Bodhisattvas. Generally, in Pali Sutta, you really don't see the presence of other Bodhisattvas. Mostly the discussion is between Buddha and the Arahats, Shariputra and other Arahats. Not you don't see actually presence of Bodhisattvas around. Anyway, okay, so now if I actually move a little bit further, given the time we don't have much time. Okay, so if you look at this, 1 minute. At that time, Brother Shariputra addressed these verses to Bhagwan. A guide, I'm astonished, I'm content with hearing these words. From now on, I will never have doubts. I'm ripened in the supreme dhyana. So now Shariputra heard the teaching on Ekayana, and basically he was comfortable. He was happy. And the teaching of the Sugata is marvelous. It clears my doubts and misery of beings. My developments have ceased, and there is no misery. Hearing your speech has dispelled everything. So, in a sense, I think. But then, not only that, Shariputra Buddha would at a certain point actually prophesize the supreme enlightenment of Shariputra in the front of all devas. So, which means that all the main arahants of Buddha amongst the Buddha's disciples at a certain point will become also Buddha by treading this path. Okay. Now, where is the main one? And then this is also what Buddha says, because Shariputra thought that Buddha never taught before, and whereas Buddha was saying, in response to these words from the Shariputra, Bhagavan said to Shariputra, before the world and its devas, with Maras and Brahman, it's the Medicans and Brahmins, I declare to you and reveal to you, Shariputra, in the presence of 100,000 million quintillion Buddhas that I have ripened you for complete enlightenment. Shariputra, you have been my follower for a long time. Shariputra, it is through the Bodhisattva's instruction and the great secret of Bodhisattva that you have appeared here with my teaching. Essentially, what this does is basically Buddha goes and announces his enlightenment. And where is that? Okay. So he says, complete enlightenment, these practice of Bodhisattva, and then you will appear in the world as Tathagata, the Arahat, the perfect enlightenment Buddha, the one with the perfect wisdom and the conduct, the Sugata, the knower of the world, the unsurpassable guide who tames beings, the teacher of the gods and humans, the Buddhas and the Bhagwan, named Padma Prabha. Essentially, Shariputra is going to become this Buddha, Padma Prabha. And this is what Buddha prophesies. So I'm reading 3.29, the end of it, and there basically Buddha declares that Shariputra is eventually going to be Buddha. And we usually say this, I think, it's kind of amongst the Tibetans, because remember, Tibetans are Mahayanists, and they tend to think Shravakas in particular, eventually Buddhas are going to knock their doors and says, well, wake up, my fellow friend, it's time to wake up. And you've been sleeping with the Nibbana for too long. It's time to get up and do something. And then, of course, they tread Bodhisattva career for a certain period of time and then become Buddha. So that's, in a sense, this sutra literally lays out and gives an example of how it is going to happen. Okay. And here is in the verse form. And the interesting thing about the sutras is you have this verse, you got long paragraphs written, and then verses followed by them. And usually the verses are in condensed form of the discursive sort of the teaching here. Thereupon the Bhagavan spawned these words. In the future time, you, Shari Sutta is another epithet or another name for Shariputra, will become a Jina, is a victorious, a Tathagata, and the all-seeing Padma Prabhava, who will guide 10 billion beings. So that's one important event, at least in Shariputra's life. Okay, so let's move on to this more important, the parable. Okay, where is it? This one. And this one, of course, even 3.53 is quite an important, not only talk about prophecy, Shariputra's prophecy, but also kind of summary of Buddha's teaching. He says, bhikkhus, the highlighted one, bhikkhus, the ultimate conclusion of the disciple of the Dharma is the transcendence of birth, aging, sickness, and death. The goal of nirvana, being absorbed in nirvana. Bhagwan, these bhikshus, both those training and trained, have renounced the view of self, the view of production, the view of destruction, all views. So essentially, those who follow Buddha's teaching, and actually those who become arahats, pratik Buddhas, and shravakas, they have achieve their goal, abandoned all the views to do with egocentricity and so forth. Okay, now, and then he says, Shariputra basically says, having heard from the Bhagavan this kind of dharma, which they have never heard before, they are puzzled Bhagavan, so that the fourfold assembly will be without doubt and without uncertainty, and that these bhikkhu will have their worries dispelled. I beseech the Bhagavan to teach them. Now this is basically Shariputra asking Buddha to unpack more of what he has taught about the ekayana, and namely one single yana and the skillful teaching. And the Buddha said to the Shariputra, he says, Shariputra, knowing the differences, aspirations. Now here is the key point. Knowing the different aspirations, different thoughts and nature of beings, Tathagata, Arahat, perfectly enlightened Buddha teaches the Dharma through various accomplishments, causes, reasons, parables, supports, definitions, skillful methods in this way, commencing with the highest complete enlightenment through all the teachings of Dharma. He inspires them to enter into this very bodhisattvayana. Have I not already taught you this earlier? So Shariputra is insisting that he hasn't heard, and there are a lot of other Shravakas who hasn't heard Buddha's teaching. And Buddha said, actually, I did. I gave this teaching before, and haven't you heard this? Where were you? Almost like. So then 3.55 says, however, Shariputra, in order to teach the meaning extensively, I shall teach you the parables. So perhaps earlier on, of course, when he taught mostly for the bodhisattvas were able to hear, but perhaps Shravakas, because their goal is mostly, they are not interested in becoming fully enlightened. So maybe they usually didn't give much attention to them, to the Mahayana teaching. But what Buddha is going to do is going to use examples, parables of syllables to similes to show what he actually was talking about. So he gives this example. Why is that? Some wise individuals will understand through parables the meaning of what has been said. A parable, Shariputra, in a village town. So now this is it's a long, sort of very discursive point, but here is the description. So there is basically old elder, advanced in age, was very rich, wealthy, and his home was, there was a very, 3-story, I think. Does it say 3-story? But a massive building he has, and he has lots of cousin brothers and sisters, almost 500 of them in his house. But the house was dilapidated, very old ruin, literally like almost about to crumble. And then he noticed that it's on fire. A certain section of the house was on fire. And now he needs to bring those 500 kids, basically very busily playing with their toys, to bring up. The question is, how are you going to do it? How is this old elderly man bring those 500 kids outside? So then Buddha used this sort of old gentleman used the parable okay, so let me say which section is it. So essentially you can see that it was roofed with hay, a terrace was crumbling, the base of the pillars were rotten, the walls and doors were disintegrating, and the great fire started suddenly throughout the house from all sides. So now, unless you do something to basically bring those kids out, there's 500 of them, not easy. So, and there's only one, looks like there's only one man. Well, the analogy is. So then how are you going to do it? How are you going to manage? And there's only one door. Remember, there's only one door. And this looks like the man is pretty well built, it says, very well built. But it so happens that, describes this. And then 356, Shariputra, the man was very strong and had very strong arms. He thought, I'm strong. So now, is he going to use his strength? In which case, strong arm, and there's only one door. Maybe I have to a door is big enough that one person only can fit. So it's not possible to bring all the 500 kids. And the house is already engulfing in fire. How are you going to do that? So that's the challenge for the elderly gentleman. So then the question is, and then you remember here, he says, the house has only one door, and that door is narrow. Okay, these are important descriptions that matters. And these young ones don't stay still and always running around. Okay, and won't be able to bring them out, and they will be the disaster of the agony in the great fire. So unless you do them something and very quick, and therefore remember now you can need a very skill. You can't use your strength because there's only one door, only space enough to fit yourself. So you can't bring them, and you can't. You could say, well, I can lift them all. Unfortunately, you may be able to lift, but you can't pass through the door. So that's no use. So remember, you could say Buddha was such a compassionate, very all-powerful person. Can he bring all disciples with his own shoulder? He can't. Just like this one, it's a narrow track. And he says, then he called out the student. Of course, there is a massive fire burning the house now. 3:57. Everything inside this house is going to be burnt in this great fire. You will suffer this disaster. Children, come out. Of course, children doesn't know what fire is. What is fire? They have no clue what fire is. And they perhaps would run towards fire and play. Who knows? So then, how are you going to protect them? So then the man gave the command, wishing to help them, but the children not knowing what burning means. They don't know what is burning. They said, you get burned by the fire, come out. They have no idea. They might look around and dazed and totally lost. And they're probably, this new toy, looking like red, and they might run towards them. So they did not think it and did not come out. So they, of course, don't know the danger of fire and did not come out. Instead, they basically just start running around. And then the man thought, a great fire is burning this house. My children and I are going to be afflicted disastrously by this great fire. But if I use skillful method, now here's the crucial term, skillful method, I'll be able to bring the children out of the fire. So now he can't use his force, he can't use his strength, because the door is so small, because he himself is supposed to be very big build. So the only thing that he can use is use his mind in a very skillful way so that he can lure those kids outside. Basically, he needs to bring them from outside of the house. So the man knew what these children thought. So, but because they are his children, he knows what they're like. So he said he understood that they would wish many different kinds of amusements and many different kinds of things. A variety of delightful things, of course, like children's toys. Apparently, there are different types of toys. Toys made up of ox-driven cart. I mean, we're talking about 2,500 years ago. So there are no sophisticated technological, technology. So ox-driven cart, goat-driven cart, deer-driven cart. Animal, even in India, perhaps deer-driven cart. Okay, let's let it be. So those looks like there are these different cards they play, and they love those cards. And of course they are there. And then he said, okay, apparently those kids basically they like those cards. And then what this old man is going to do is he's going to use their likes as a temptation, or more or less, what do you call this? Bait, literally bait to pull them out. So he said, okay, outside at the entrance. So he said, okay, those I have placed outside the entrance door of the house so that you can play at them. Now, this is what he said. Those toys that you like, ox-driven cart, goat-driven cart, deer-driven cart, I have all of them, and they are brand new. But they are outside the house. If you really want them, you have to come out. So then, of course, they would. All the kids, they loved those toys. They would come out, and that's exactly what happened. And so then those children, hearing that, the names of those things, namely the different toys, they are so delighted, and basically came rushing out of the house. Okay, so then the men saw that they had come out safe and well and were no longer in danger. So now here the idea is skillful means. He did not use his strength, but it is so urgent that he actually think very quickly and then come up with the skillful means. And when he used the skillful means, he used their own interest, the children's interest, to lure them out. So then they come out themselves because they could run. Now they are tiny, they could run and flock out. And then as soon as they're out, they're looking for the toys, ox-driven cart, reindeer-driven cart, goat-driven cart, and they were looking, where is the goat? And when they're out, they were given only one cart, and there was an ox-driven cart. There were no reindeers, there were no goat cart. There's just only one cart, namely the ox-driven, most powerful oxen-driven cart, and that most powerful oxen-driven cart is a resemblance of Bodhisattva yana or Buddha yana. Because cart essentially means yana, right? It's a Sanskrit translation of yana, vehicle. So then Shariputra, the man, gave all his sons cart drawn by a powerful oxen that were, I'm reading 3.69, 62. They were driven fast. Yes, Trent.
Oh, so I was just going to ask if the father had said there's 3 carts out here, when in actual fact there are only 1.
Yeah.
Does that then represent the 3 yanas?
Yeah.
When the truth is that there is really only 1. Does my question make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It does, actually. Yeah. Yes. Those 3 different types of cart, goat cart, reindeer cart, and oxen cart, all represent 3 yanas. And they were already, and remember, those carts are already in the house. They're playing, which means each beings are attracted to different types of yanas, different types of cart. But when they come out, they were given, now they're already free. Remember, this big house represents samsara. This big deliberated building that is about to collapse because of fire represents samsara. And therefore, remember, those are arahats. Arahats, pratik Buddhas and pratik, Shravakas, they're already freed. They have freed themselves from samsara now. So which means when they come out of the house, they resemble that they are already free individuals, liberated individuals. They got liberated because depending on 3 yanas. Now, since they are fully liberated, Buddha was saying that they are ready to actually to take the biggest step, namely the step of Buddha yana, which is the ultimate step. Yes. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So then, remember, the card were made of 7 precious materials. If you look at those 7 precious materials, they were pretty sort of crude. But old days, those 7 precious materials would be those materials that are so valuable. Anyway, so the question then is, was this old gentleman lying? And if he was lying, was Buddha lying when he said that actually there is only 1 yana in the end, and just used them to lure? And there, of course, the sutra justifies saying that no, he was not lying. Actually, he uses a skill to save those beings, and therefore, of course, with a great intention, with this help of using the skills, he was able to save. Okay, so then he gave to each of his children an ox-driven cart that was fast as the wind. Wow, look at that, fast as wind. Shariputra, what was the reason for that? The man was rich, wealthy, and he had treasures. Now this is important. So you could ask, why is it that actually he gave them the best of all the carts? Well, goat cart seems to be good, but not so good. And the deer cart seems to be not good, but not good. But those, oxen cart, as fast as wind. That sounds very, wonderful. So he gave actually the best best card. That's the idea. He thought there's no reason why I should give inferior cards to my children. Why is that? All these children are my sons. All of them are dear and precious to me. If I have such great cards, I should treat them all equally and not unequally. So otherwise, if you give some of them ox card, others, reindeer card, and some others goat card, then of course that looks like plain discrimination, kind of, at least to a certain extent. So this gentleman says, of course, he was not about to do that. They are all his sons. He treat all equally. Now the same idea applies here. Buddha's treatment of all beings, just like this elder statement, all beings are for him equal. There is no differentiation. It does not make difference between, oh, you guys are inferior, Hinayanas, these guys are bodhisattvas, great beings. It does not make that distinction. That distinction actually is done by individuals themselves. That's very important. So therefore, because individuals are attracted to different things, they actually differentiate the three yanas, not Buddha. Okay, just like, remember, this old man, he has only one card to give, but those various cards are the cards that actually each of these kids seems to be attracted. I have many treasures, so not to speak of my own. Okay, so that's one. And Shariputra, what do you think? In that way, the man first promised 3 cards to those children, but afterward gave them all such great cards, magnificent cards. Does that mean that man would be a liar? Now, that question is being posed here. And the Shariputra was asked this question by Buddha, and Shariputra said, no, Bhagwan, he would not be. Answered the Shariputra, Sugata, it is not like that. The main thought, through employing the skillful method, brought those children out of the burning house in order to save their lives. That's the reason why he did. He brought out. And therefore, that's the only reason. There's nothing for him to gain. Usually you lie when you have certain sort of ulterior motive, selfish motive to lie. But this gentleman has nothing to lie, no reason to lie. In fact, the only reason he did is actually to save those beings. Otherwise, they would not come out. And if he did not tell this skillfully, these children would not come out, which means they would end up dying which would be even disastrous. So now, getting back to the actual point. So, where is it? So now here. So he says 3.65. Excellent, Shariputra. It is so, Shariputra, it is exactly as you said. In the same way, Tathagata, Arahat, perfectly enlightened Buddha, saves from all dangers, all violence, troubles, harm, suffering, unhappiness, the darkness of ignorance, the obscurations of the dark of the blindness, and beings in bondage. So basically, this house, deliberate building, represents samsara, and in order to bring those children out of samsara, just as the old man used his wisdom or skillfulness, Buddha does the same thing. And he says, 366, a Tathagata has wisdom, strength, fearlessness, and unique qualities of Buddha. He has a great power through miraculous powers. He is a father to the world, has reached the perfection of supreme wisdom of skill in a great method. He has a great compassion. He has untiring minds. He wishes to benefit. But just as the old man did not use his strength, because if to do that, he won't be able to bring the children outside. And he says, Buddha actually, instead of using those strength, he says he is compassionate. He appears in the three realms that are like house with a ruined upper story and roof burning with a great mass of suffering. And he liberates from desire, anger, ignorance, those beings who undergo birth, aging, and so on. The darkness of ignorance, the obscuration of the blindness. And he says, as soon as he appears, he sees the beings, burned, roasted, pained. And where is now the actual point? Skip. Okay. Now, exactly, just like those little kids, Buddha was saying, these beings, ordinary beings, they say they amuse themselves in three realms. Remember, we talked about those three-story house of the deliberate building represent the three realms. The realm, desire realm, in which most of us habitate, and then the form realm and formless realm, mostly gods live. And basically, it says three realms which are like burning house, running back and forth. Even though they are afflicted by that great mass of suffering, they do not see it and identify with the suffering. So just like kids playing around the fire, even though all fire is about to engulf them, the kids doesn't know. In the same way, we as ordinary being, basically we are literally roasted by the fire of attachment, desire, anger, and so forth. But still, we don't really realize that it's suffering. So therefore, the Buddha's job is to rescue. And he says, this Shariputra is how Tathagata sees it. I'm the father of these things. Okay, that's already said. Okay. This Shariputra is how Tathagata sees it. It is said that I have the strength. Okay, that's not it. So essentially, those would not become the now here is the important thing. And you might ask, okay, remember in the parable, the strong man did not use his strength because he can't use his strength because there is only one small alleyway, small sort of lane, small doorway that he can. So which means kids needs to pass through themselves. And in the same way, he says, Buddha has enormous power and strength of compassion, wisdom, and so forth. But unfortunately, if he use them, he cannot liberate sentient beings by using Buddha's compassion. Buddha compassion can lead them, but in the end, each individual needs to walk, just as those kids walk themselves through those gates, which means they have to take this personal initiative to be able to come out. And that's why, unless and until they did it, Buddha's compassion, Buddha's wisdom, the strength will not be able to liberate all beings. So that's the very important message, I think, here. This Shariputra is how Tathagata sees it. It is said that I have strength of wisdom, strength of miraculous powers. If I hadn't no method instructed these beings to attain liberations, Tathagata's wisdom, strength, and fearlessness, those beings would not become liberated through those dharmas. They cannot become liberated because of Buddha's miraculous powers, miraculous wisdom, miraculous compassion. The reason they have to do themselves, just like those little kids, they came out from this small door themselves with the instruction, of course, the guidelines given by the wise old man. In the same way, Buddha gives us instruction, and then it is us who have to go through. And that's the reason why Buddha, the point is, this is also reminiscence of the point that Buddha says, I cannot wash the sins or sins of the beings. They have to do it themselves. The purification has to be done individually. Buddhas cannot do it. Why is that? Those beings are attached to the sensory pleasures, delighted in three realms. They would not become liberated from birth, aging, illness, death, misery, wailing, suffering, unhappiness, and disturbance. They would not escape from the three realms, which are the like house with the dilapidated roof and rafters that are on the fire, and in which they will be burnt, roasted, pained, tormented. So how could they enjoy the wisdom of Buddhahood? That's the question. And Shariputra, the man with the strong man, did not use the strength of his arms, but used skill, a skillful method to bring the children out from this burning house. Now, this is very important. This old man did not use his strength in the same way Buddha did not use his strength. He can't use the strength because those strength is not going to liberate individuals, just like the strength is not going to allow these old men to save those kids. Instead, the old man used his wisdom and the skillful. After he gave the magnificent great cards, in the same way, Shariputra, Tathagata, Arhat's perfectly enlightened Buddha, has the wisdom, strength, and fearlessness. But instead of using Tathagata's wisdom, strength, and fearlessness, through the wisdom of skills and method. Now, that's what Buddha used. Buddha used skill in methods. Skills and method. He teaches three yanas in order to free beings from the three realms. So the point is that Buddha teaches three yanas as a skill, as a skillful means, just as the old men used those three different cards to lure them out so that they can be free. In the same way, Buddha used those three yanas just to lure individuals from samsara. And when they come out from samsara, become free from samsara, liberated in samsara, and then of course they can be taken further into the Buddha yana. And so this is the reason. I think this is the heart of the sutra, very important. So the point is that Buddha did not use his wisdom or fearlessness or strength, but he used the wisdom of skillfulness method to teach those three yanas in order to free beings from the three realms, which are like the dilapidated house with its roof and rafters on fire. He guides beings through the he guides beings through the three yanas, which are the Shravaka, Pratyaganas, and the Bodhisattva yanas, right? Okay, so and then eventually, and once individuals are free, liberated arahants, then of course then Buddha is going to coax them up gradually to the Buddha yana. He says to them, do not take pleasure in form, sound, smells, taste, and physical sensations in three realms, which are like the house on fire. Through taking pleasures in these three realms, through craving for the sensory pleasures, we will be burned, roasted, pinned. This is how one escapes from the three realms, obtain the three yanas, the Shravakayana, Pratyeka Buddhayana, and the Bodhisattva yana. Okay. So basically, that's I think the most important point of it. And this, I promise you, I shall give you these three yanas dedicated. So okay, so that I think the message of the whole, the most important point. I think we need to get those details right. Namely, why is it that Buddha taught three yanas? On what ground? And how does it actually display or depicts Buddha's skillfulness? And why did he rely on the skillfulness rather than the strength of the power of his compassion, power of his wisdom? Okay, I think that's the main point there. So, yes, please.
Can you just briefly tell us the difference between the three yanas, just as a recall?
Oh, okay. Yes,
Just very briefly, yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
very good point. Right, three yanas. Remember, okay, so where is the actual word? Remember here? You can see at the end of this, 371. First one is Shravakayana, then Pratyek Buddhayana, and then Bodhisattva yana. Shravakayana basically is a vehicle of listeners. Sometimes you could say listening yana or listening vehicle, namely the disciples who follows Buddha's teaching very seriously, and those are the actually already liberated individuals. And there could be both, but nyantu, Tibetan word is nyantu. Those take Buddha's teaching so seriously and practice them, implement them, and of course, as a result of which they are fully liberated. That's one yana. And remember, it is individual again. It's mostly individual liberation. They're not, well, of course, they have the interest for the welfare of other beings, but the priority is first making sure that they are individually liberated. Pratyek Buddhayana is Rangel, sometimes called, those are solitary individual Buddhas. They would not, in fact, want to live in the community. They would actually be in the wilderness or maybe mostly in this solitude meditating. And in fact, usually they would actually disappear when the Buddha is present because they are individual Buddhas and they are, sometimes they're called self-realized. Based on Buddha's teaching, of course, yes, they become individual Buddhas. But again, it is, goal is oriented towards becoming individual individual liberation. So they are already liberated individuals. And there's not a huge gap between these two, but generally we say that if you have to look from the hierarchical point of view, the least developed is Shravakayana, and the middle in the is the Pratyek Buddha, because they are very mature in the terms of purification in terms of the spiritual development. And then, of course, Bodhisattva Yana. Bodhisattva Yana, the vehicle that takes individual become a Bodhisattva. But there are two types of Bodhisattvas. One is ordinary Bodhisattva and the other one is Arya Bodhisattva. Ordinary Bodhisattvas just could be just like us ordinary beings can be still afflicted by attachment, desire, and so forth. But then they are also very, very committed to the welfare of other beings. So therefore, Bodhisattva. Remember, Bodhisattva means somebody who is actually very committed for the welfare of the many, rather than one's own individual. So that's why ultimately that's the yana that Buddha is going to use to take beings from Shravakayana, Pratyayana, and Bodhisattvayana to Buddhayana, because to become a Buddha, one has to become a Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is a transition point. So you become Bodhisattva and then become Arya Bodhisattva, noble Bodhisattva. And with the noble Bodhisattva, remember that you have a strong altruism, strong commitment for the welfare of individuals. And that altruism is missing in the case of Pratyek Buddha and Shravakayana. So therefore, they are considered as a lesser vehicle precisely because the commitment that they have for the welfare of beings is little less compared to Bodhisattva. Of course, if you compare with us, a commitment we have as ordinary beings and with the Shravakayana and Pratyek Buddhayana, they, of course, it's far, almost incomparable. Their commitment and their amount of power of compassion, well-being, compassion, karuna, mudita, remember, of course, theirs is very, very mature as compared to us. But still, compared to Buddha and Bodhisattva, theirs is little less mature. So that's why sometimes we call, pejoratively called Hinayana. Lesser vehicle, namely Shravakayana and Pratyek Buddha, both a lesser vehicle or a smaller vehicle because it's an individually sort of focused path. Whereas Bodhisattvayana is a greater vehicle because the focus there is now you won't become enlightened for the sake of the many. So that's why it's based on the ethics. Essentially, the major difference is the ethics and the commitment, ethical commitment. If you have ethical commitment for the welfare of all beings, that would make you Bodhisattva. If your ethical commitment was actually for the individual liberation, that would make you either Shravaka or Pratyek Buddhayana. But eventually on this sutra, you have to actually gradually come back and become Bodhisattva at a certain stage, and then from there move to become full Buddha. So that's the purpose of this sutra. Okay? Right. So pleasure. Thank you. Okay, so now, of course, here there's a long, fairly long discussion, so you can enjoy it. I think we have basically explained the gist of it. Okay, we don't have time to go through all of them. Now, here, one point perhaps. 3.75, he says, he does not teach any being to attain nirvana for themselves. He brings all beings to nirvana through the great nirvana of Tathagata's nirvana. So basically, this is the ultimate teaching. In a sense, he's not the teaching of Lotus Sutra is a teaching about Ekayana. So which means the whole emphasis is to become a Buddha rather than Pratyek Buddha, or rather than Shravaka or Pratyek Buddha, or even Bodhisattva. Eventually, you want to lead beings, and in order to do that, he says, Shariputra, Tathagata gives those beings that are liberated from the three realms. Now, remember, they are all liberated, just as those liberated kids from the liberated house. And then what do Buddhas teach? From the he teaches them the delightful dhyanas. In dhyanas are concentration, highly developed, concentrated, states. Train them, and then of course along with them comes with it different sort of blissful, if you like, liberated sort of moments of experience. Samadhis are deep moments like that, and some samapatis are even the deeper absorptions. And then, of course, associated with them supreme bliss. But those have to come along with commitment to work for the benefit of all beings. Okay. Is there anything? Okay. So this says the same thing again, 376. In the same way, Shariputra Tathagata, the Arahat, the perfectly enlightened Buddha, with his skill in the methods, first teaches 3 yanas, and afterward brings beings to nirvana through a single yana, right? Therefore, he is not a liar. Now, that, of course, just as this old gentleman was not a liar, we could say, yes, Buddha, Buddha was not a liar by introducing them to 3 yanas, and then all of a sudden saying, oh, eventually, ultimately, there is one yana, but the 3 yanas in the beginning, they are important, they make sense, because you guys are interested in the different things. So 3 yanas represented different individualities, and then later on, of course, most of the individuals come down to ones who are fully liberated. Even the sense of individuality, egocentricity is melt. Then, of course, he would introduce us to this single yana, ekayana. So that's why Sutra says Buddha was not a liar. Why is that? Shariputra Tathagata possesses any treasuries of wisdom, strength, and fearlessness, and he has the power to teach all beings the dharma of omnipresent wisdom. Shariputra, should be known that it is through this teaching, through the accomplishment of wisdom of various skillful methods, that Tathagata teaches the single Mahayana. Okay, so that's, the verses forms are essentially kind of summarized verses of what is mostly written in the text. Okay, I think that's about it. I think. All right, so that takes us to chapter 4, and we will read chapter 4 in the next session. So for as a preparation for next month, please do read at least chapter 4 and chapter 5, and if you can, chapter 6. In case I haven't read chapter 5, so I don't know exactly what's in there. Chapter 4, you can see I read it. So if there is not much content for us to unpack, then we can quickly move into chapter 6. But at least read chapter 4 and chapter 4, chapter 5, and chapter 6 if you have time. So the question then, Lindy, is when are we meeting next month? What day? Okay, so I'll stop sharing this. Thank you guys for patient listening. And I hope there was some interesting, at least some portions, because sutras are very, very deeply repetitive. You can see some of them are very, very repetitive. Most of the sutras are like that. And also, I think just to mention, and most of the early Buddhist teaching, because they are mostly meditative manuals. In the meditation, it's again and again reminder, right? Reminder. So you just like exercise, because meditation is like any exercise, and exercise is essentially bad. It's essentially repetition. So, because early teachings, especially meditation manuals, instructions are essentially repeating the same thing again and again and again. And you can see here in the sutra a lot of repetitions. But the essential nuggets, I think, one of which, the idea is actually we try to focus on those things and then get the maximum insight out of those. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sonam. And our next meeting will be on June the 19th.
Okay, June the 19th. So I should make sure that I put this.
Okay, so we can conclude with a short meditation, do you think, Sonam?
Yeah.
Yeah, just a short dedication. Thank you.